Although it was in production for about 4 years or so, the concept of Treasure Planet was originally pitched in 1985 during the production of The Little Mermaid. The reason for this being that Clements and Musker felt that they had to wait for the right kind of technology to be developed for animation, being the ability to move the camera around a lot in scenes and get multiple different angles in one shot. And the idea to take the story of Treasure Island and put it in a futuristic timeline was intended to make the setting exciting for kids as it was back when the book was first published. As you can imagine, an idea like that has to be handled very carefully. It's interesting to take a story and see how it would work in a different setting and genre, but at times it can run the risk of being pandering and manipulative. I mean, think about it. Treasure Island in space! It can't help but sound a little gimmicky. So the question is, does Disney manage to pull this idea off of uniting the old with the new in a smart way that can appeal to the general audience? Well, critics weren't exactly kind to it. It grossed mainly 100 million worldwide, and it's generally considered one of the most expensive box office bombs. On top of that, Disney wasn't exactly doing that well with its animated features at this time, so there was also this huge lack of interest and eventually paved its way for some of the worst films Disney has released. So why do I bother to talk about it? Well, because it's become a bit of a shock and a raised eyebrow growing up as the animation snob in my class when I would tell people that Treasure Planet is, hands down, my second favorite Disney film. Not Sleeping Beauty, not Aladdin, not even The Lion King. Treasure Planet is my second favorite Disney film. Although if you want to get technical, it really means third. Because I had like 2 Disney movies at the time tied for number 1, although now it's 3 tied for 1, so that technically makes it 4th, but I digress. So why do I like it? Well, I was happy to find over the years that I wasn't the only one alone in that department. Also, I want to point out to people thinking, oh, you probably give it a pass because you're not much of a purist or lover of the book, so it doesn't bother you that much. Actually, to be perfectly frank, Treasure Island is hands down my all-time favorite book. And I even think I have 1 or 2 movie adaptations, not counting this one, as some of my favorite movies. So I thought this video might have been a good way to analyze what makes the movie good. Although I should say I don't regard it as being some underrated gem. There are valid reasons as to why this didn't do so well with the general public, but I do want to discuss its hidden appeal. Cause this movie has managed to garner its own fan base and even its own following, sometimes even attempting to put together petitions towards Disney demanding a sequel and TV series. And if you think that's silly, well, actually Disney had planned a sequel and television series. They even had scripts and concept art, but due to the movie's performance at the box office, this sadly had to have been dropped. And I don't think they would even attempt to bring them out unless the fans for the film grow more and more. But believe it or not, the fandom is in ways growing more and more, and this video is to find out why. But before we begin, I want to share one thing I find funny growing up as a Treasure Planet fan. And that is that most of its fan base, at least from my experience, appears to be female. Yes, this movie with its bloodthirsty, gross alien pirates and space adventure violence with a very muted brown and green color scheme, I found was very popular with the ladies at school. More than the guys, isn't that kind of odd? So anyway, I think I'll start off by first most talking about the world of this movie. Because a little misconception I want to explain here is that most people seem to find the whole nature of Treasure Planet to be flawed in its portrayal of the future. Like, why would people build spaceships to look like boats? How can they breathe? Where is planet Earth? And, well, that last one actually gives a little hint to the answer. It's been stated by the creators, and actually towards the beginning of the movie, that the universe our characters live and travel in is not our universe. This isn't us in the future, it's just life in some other galaxy. The world of Treasure Planet was something the creators really spent a lot of time obsessing over. They started with this idea of this galaxy that has this breathable atmosphere and just boom! Juices went all out for developing it. And this could be my opinion, but what they gave us, I think really can capture some people's imagination. For whatever reason, using me as an example, The idea of these giant galleons just flying through the sky out into space over these incredible nebulas and worlds was one of the most prominent images of my childhood. It really got me somewhere there. And I think the other images of this world they came up with is a very cool world. I can totally see why they would want to create a TV series that would fully explore and expand this universe they live in. Yeah, it's space, yeah, it's futuristic, but also kinda old and it's confusing, but it was meant more towards the genre of cyberpunk, where you kinda have these old elements mixed in, not with steam like in steampunk, but more futuristic elements like plasma and neurons. Okay, cyberpunk itself is a little confusing too, but I digress. And even then, it doesn't seem to entirely follow that kind of style, but just kind of be its own thing, and the world of Treasure Planet very much is its own thing. The science fiction here is much more warm and welcoming than any other science fiction world I've seen. There's just this rich, alluring vastness to this universe, and honestly, if they went all the way with the futuristic element, I don't think it would have worked as well. It would have sucked out the romance that the movie and even the original book was going for. I can't quite explain it. I love this world they created. Although I will admit at times it can be a little too gimmicky. Oddly enough, one of the few problems I have with the film is with the beginning where we see our main character air surfing and being extreme and rad, and okay, as soon as those scenes are done, the rest of the movie is good. Ish. And I actually think that's as good a transition as any to talk about our characters. Starting with Jim Hawkins. Because while I don't think Jim is a bad character, I will admit the one flaw with him is when the movie makers are obviously trying to use him as a tool to get with the hip teenage crowd. The sky surfing delinquency scene being an obvious example. But when Jim isn't being manipulated into relating with us, I and maybe you might find he's actually a pretty good character. When the creators aren't trying too hard to make him into, like, the rebellious teenager, the moments where they actually let the character breathe and develop do manage to capture the teenage rebellion better. Jim is very stoic and very guarded and doesn't trust so easily at first. He basically puts up this shield that a lot of young people tend to put up at this age. What most people don't know is that while there is this wall there, that doesn't mean they are far from developing or listening to others. He observes, he thinks, and he absorbs the world and the people around him, the good and the bad. That's actually a pretty important trait to put in a teenage character. And give Disney credit, it is very rare for them to even mention the fact of a parent walking out on a family, and to have that happen to a main character in one of their animated features. I admire them for touching upon that issue. A lot of kids do grow up with this problem. And it also works because this helps strengthen his relationship with John Silver as a father figure as well as a mentor. Now, in the book, the mentor part was reserved more for the other characters on the ship that weren't the pirates: Dr. Livesey, Squire Trelawney, and Captain Smollett. These characters have been changed up a bit for understandable reasons. They were originally going to have all three characters appear, with Livesey and Smollett as cat-like aliens and Trelawney as a dog-like alien. Eventually, they decided to just combine the Doctor character with the Squire character, and we got Dr. Delbert Doppler. And I suppose it was a little odd at first, but when I thought about it, it would look like most of the time there would be two pompous and strict intelligent people lording over and outnumbering one dimwit. And this does result in an interesting combination of those two characteristics, and the interactions he has with the captain are what pulls him through. The captain in this version, aside from being an alien, also goes through a gender flip, as a feline called Captain Amelia, played by Emma Thompson, who is a lot of fun, and she may be one of the reasons half the fans of this movie were women. And Thompson's performance is a big part to her charm. She's quick, she's funny, she's dignified and sophisticated, but also very gung-ho and not afraid to get down and gritty to save the crew. Even if she's not at all that pleased with their behavior, which is most of the time. But she's not the only one with a good performance. We have stage actor Brian Murphy as Long John Silver, who, by the way, is really great. One of the best parts of the movie. This was the first time I ever saw someone try and act out the character, and I dare even say it's one of the best portrayals. He's this good-humored, devious, but jovial bear alien thing, animated by my favorite Disney artist, Glenn Keane. He's also given some of the best things with this period update. In the book, he just had a wooden leg, but here he's a full-out cyborg. That's a pretty clever rendition. Oddly enough, people complain that the character of Silver here is that he's not particularly devious or that much of a villain. Were we watching the same movie? Or even read the same book? Silver wasn't meant to be a villain. If anything, he's an anti-villain. The book showed us a character in a young adult novel that at the time was the first time we got an antagonist, wasn't just born bad. Silver certainly was manipulative and greedy and flipped sides on a dime, but the few moments he spent with Hawkins certainly showed some genuine care. And Disney, being Disney, of course, brought out those moments more. It shows that Silver doesn't really prefer to do terrible things. He's just a guy who lived on a life of survival. The relationship between Jim and Silver is one of the core keys for any Treasure Island adaptation, and I think they really hit the mark here. Murray hits a good balance between rough roguish charm and tenderness. I think the versions of the characters here, along with the acting, I think are really strong and hold up well. On the subject of comic relief, Silver's parrot Flint has been replaced with a pink blobbish goop alien named Morph. And instead of repeating sentences like a parrot, he instead imitates images of the people and objects around him, and that manages to be a cute gag now and then. But then we get the character of Ben Gunn as a copper-covered robot who is very excitable and loud and easily freaked and was obviously meant to be obnoxious. And yes, the character of Ben Gunn was excitable and eccentric, but it was clear he still had this intelligence and sanity that he has managed to hold on to after being marooned for so long. And I guess I can kind of expect Disney to try and show that crazy part more so as to get a few laughs, but when you have a character like this, you have to be really careful with the voice you pick for him. Because if done right, it can be funny. If done wrong, it can be really annoying. And they pick Martin Short. Guess which category he falls under?
It's all flooding back! Oh, my memory!
Bad, Ben. Bad. Okay, fixing.
Back you go, you naughty plus! I am not leaving my buddy, Jimmy! Unless he looks at me like that. Bye, Jim!
Ack! I know, just... Ack! I can, honestly enough, I can see a Billy Crystal working for this character more, or even a Kevin McDonald, who, oddly enough, also starred in another science fiction Disney film at this time.
No! Crazy head? Well, that'd be a bad idea.
But Martin here, well, to be fair, it's not one of his worst performances, but compared to the rest of the acting in this film, it is very jarring and very, very grating. And hey, guess what? He was the character they overused in the advertising of this film, even though he only, showed up in the last third. So, good for the movie, but bad for the advertising, I guess. And while we're on the subject, I guess part of the reason so many people were turned off by the movie could have been the emphasis of the Martin Short robot. But considering that a similar situation like that was happening with Frozen and the Snowman, I don't think it was entirely to blame. Frozen, in spite of its poor advertising, went on to be one of the highest-grossing animated films of all time. With Treasure Planet, it was the opposite effect. So I don't think the hammering of the Ben character was the result of that. But I do think some of it may be due to the film's advertising. One, and forgive me if this sounds a bit cynical, Frozen probably got more people's interest because it is a fantasy, and a fairy tale at that. And that's just Disney's bread and butter, so of course people would be more interested. And two, as I've said before, one of Treasure Planet's glaring flaws is in its gimmicks, and its intense desire to be cool and hip. And this wasn't the first time Disney has tried to do this at the time. And all those other times they tried didn't do so hot, so of course people got a little suspicious. Now, am I seriously comparing Frozen with Treasure Planet? No. Frozen is definitely the better of the two. Treasure Planet does have a good story and an interesting world and a meaty enough cast of characters. Where it falls flat is in the few directional mistakes it makes. A science fiction take on this story does sound very manipulative, and in many ways it is. There are a lot of scenes that try too hard, and it is very distracting. But when they aren't trying to do that, they accomplish something better. I honestly think if they took out a few scenes that focus too much on trying to make themselves popular and just let this world they created breathe instead of pistol whipping us in the head with its plasma-powered guns, we could have gotten something more decent. Maybe even more than decent. So yeah, in terms of the world and the characters, there are some good things and there are some bad things, and the latter can get pretty eye-roll worthy. But one thing that is consistently good, which is also the last factor of the film I will talk about, is the message. Now, usually when Disney adapts something, they have to add in their own moral that wasn't in the original source, usually in fairy tales or fables. Aladdin had the aspect of freedom and the message of being true to yourself. Princess and the Frog was having a balance of success and friends in your life. Treasure Planet's one of the few that keeps its original message but also adds more to it. Yes, it's strange, because this is already pretty far from Robert Louis Stevenson's original story, but again, it was just a little exercise to see how Stevenson would have wrote this if he at the time were writing a science fiction. I mean, given how some people back in the old days would have defined the future and sci-fi in general, it was pretty weird. But it at the very least had a lot of character. But the thing about Treasure Island is that it's a classic staple of the adventure genre, and the fact that more often the most important things you learn in life are outside the classroom. You learn better by taking action, having experiences, and learning from them, particularly when you're young, which is why the book was mostly aimed for children and young adults. But aside from events, it's also from the people around you, and who you decide to have an impact in your life. That's why I thought the added aspect of Silver as a surrogate father figure to Jim fits so well, and is handled so well. At the very least, they got the spirit of the book down, and I'm happy to see that being given to me by Disney. With that said, would this film have done better if it were a bit more traditional and faithful to the book's time period? Probably, and I probably would have liked to have seen that too. But at the same time, I do have this fondness for the world they created, and I do think some of the liberties they've taken are creative. They just had to have been more careful with the other liberties they took. All in all, you can say what you want about the movie. It's definitely not one of Disney's gems, but I really like it. I just think it needs a bit more dirt brushed off of its surface. I hope to one day see it gleam, but for now, I'm fine considering it as a personal treasure.